to order, please. So we're having a bit of a hybrid situation tonight. This is a posted special meeting of the Village Board of Trustees, but its purpose is to conduct community conversation with the Riverside Police Department, the command staff, which is here with us tonight. It is Thursday, August 20th, 2020, and the time is 6 p.m. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Chief Weitzel.
Here.
Deputy Chief Gutschick.
I'm here.
Lieutenant Lara.
Present.
Also present, Village Manager Francis, Village Clerk Haley, and Trustee Evans.
So in terms of the special meeting component of this, because we do not have a quorum present of the trustees, we're going to go ahead and continue with the meeting. It's just under statute, that means that we will not be able to take any kind of formal action, which we weren't going to do anyway. So this was just the reason we posted it was so that if the trustees did want to come and participate, they would be able to do so legally. So let's get on now with the important part, which is talking to each other. So first, I would like to introduce the panel that we have with us here this evening. This is our command staff of the Riverside Police Department. Chief of Police Tom Weitzel has been on the Riverside Police Department since September of 1984. Before joining Riverside, he served as a patrolman for the Chicago Zoological Park Police at Brookfield Zoo. Chief Weitzel has held various positions within the Riverside Police Department, including the Crime Prevention Coordinator, Evidence Technician, Public Information Officer, Major Crime Assistance Team member, Field Training Officer, and Internal Affairs Supervisor. Chief Weitzel holds a master's degree in criminal social justice from Lewis University and is a graduate of the Illinois Law Enforcement Executive Institute's Executive Management Program and was recently honored as a certified police chief for the state of Illinois. Deputy Chief of Police William Gutschick has been working for the Riverside community for over 32 years. Deputy Chief has held various positions within the Riverside Police Department, including Officer in Charge, Communications Supervisor, Patrol Sergeant, Operations Lieutenant, Evidence Technician Coordinator, Juvenile Officer, and Accident Reconstructionist. Bill is a graduate of Northwestern University Center for Public Safety School of Staff and Command, and he also holds certificates of graduation from Midwest Leadership Institute, National Institute for Justice, FBI Midwest Executive Development, the Rural Law Enforcement Technology Institute, Command and Supervisor Leader Institute, FBI Law Enforcement, Executive Development Association, and Chief Executive Officer for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He served as president of the Riverside Police Pension Fund and as a member of the Illinois Impaired Driving Task Force. Lastly, Lieutenant Frank Lara has been working for the Village of Riverside for over 33 years. Lieutenant Lara serves as Operations Lieutenant, and his duties include direct supervision of the 3 patrol sergeants and detective sergeant. He also has daily supervision of the patrol, investigations, and parking enforcement units. Other duties include equipment, building, and police vehicle management. Lieutenant Lara has held various positions for the Riverside Police Department, including Officer in Charge, Juvenile Officer Coordinator, Patrol Sergeant, Traffic Unit Coordinator, and Detective Sergeant. Frank is a graduate of Northwestern University's Center for Public Safety School of Staff and Command. He holds certificates of graduation from the Midwest Leadership Institute and the Law Enforcement Training Board, lead homicide investigator. In addition, he serves as the treasurer of the Illinois Police Association. So please welcome our staff, please. You can. So before we get into the questions and conversation, I've asked our panel to give us a very brief overview of the Riverside Police Department that might answer some of the more basic questions we have. So I'll turn it over to our panel and Chief Weitzel.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So we move along quickly. I'll just give you a real brief overview of the department. Currently, we're staffed at 19. That's all the way up to the Chief of Police. We're a small agency, but we're well-educated, well-trained, and most of our employees that come here stay here for their career, which is usually 25 to 30 years. We have a diverse force, and we have probably going to be going through a change pretty soon here because a lot of officers are coming up on their 30-year mark, which is a normal progression through law enforcement. But we're small, but we're very efficient, and very well-trained police department. So you can go ahead with anything else.
Did anybody else want to say anything?
You can just go to the next one.
Okay. Well, so why don't we pick up there with the last thing that Chief Weitzel said in terms of the training. One question that I got repeatedly was exactly how does somebody become a police officer in Riverside? What is the actual selection process that somebody has to go through in the training and the selection process? But before I ask that question to be answered, I want to note that we're joined now by two other trustees. We have Trustee Gisa in the back, and Trustee Hannon has also joined us. So can you tell us a little bit about what the process is for someone to become a police officer in Riverside?
I'll take my mask off while I speak so I could be clear. Yeah, it's governed by state statute, and it's also governed by the Police and Fire Commissioners Act here in Riverside. So Riverside has a Police and Fire Commission. They do the hiring and discipline of police officers. So the police chief or the police department plays no role in that. The commission does the advertising for the officers. It's governed by standards of written test, oral examination, preference points. So the Illinois statutes have preference points for military veterans and for other college-educated military or educational points. And then they post a list, and then we hire from that list per statute. And there's two statutes. There's the Illinois statute for hiring police officers, and then there's the Police and Fire Commissioner Act. And those police and fire commissioners, I'll jump right into that, just go ahead a little bit. They're 3 residents of the village that are appointed by the president with the consent of the board to do the hiring and discipline. The discipline would be recommended by the chief in an independent panel. The board would either uphold my request for discipline or in some cases they could lessen it. So these are residents of the village of Riverside that do all the hiring and discipline. The police chief plays no role. I have no say. I have no chief points. Like some communities allow their chief to have maybe 1 or 2 points towards hiring. I have 0 participation in that. When that list is posted, we post from that list, or we hire from that list. So it's really a very structured process per the statute.
So we did have a couple follow-up questions about the commission structure, and we have one here about the vetting. Are the results of the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners public? And are there psychological exams? And if they are they done internally or externally? And if they're done externally, are they done by a private or public institution? So a little bit more about the vetting process for the police candidates.
Yeah, so it's a very lengthy, actually. It probably takes 6 to 8 months to hire an officer off the list. So the background investigations, the physical exams, the psychological exams are covered by state law. They're not released to the public. And in fact, they're not even released to the candidate. So when you go through we use an independent company called Laser and Associates that does the psychological exams. And we use our background investigations are done by our detectives, and then there's some other background investigation work done in addition to the Laser and Associates. So it's very structured. Our police and fire commissioner chose to go with an outside company to do that, so there's no participation from the agency ourselves. So the candidates go to a independent company in Chicago that conducts that, and they deliver the report to the commissioners. Those reports don't go to me. They go to the police and fire commissioners. They get those reports, and by statute, they're not released. They're covered by the Personnel Act, and they're also covered by HIPAA because there's medical information in there, so they're not allowed by statute to release that.
So one of the concerns that we've heard in the last several months is with regard to the kind of the nature of training of police officers. And I understand that these candidates have to go to an actual training academy, and I think those curricula are also set by statute, right?
That's correct.
So we get these young men and women that come to us from the academy. What do we do here in Riverside to help train them in terms of becoming a Riverside police officer that is in sync with the kind of the values and the character of our community?
That's a really good question. I'll answer that, and I'll give some of the internal training to the deputy chief. But so you have to, by statute, you have to go to the police academy. Right now, it's 16 weeks. There is a piece of legislation pending in Springfield to increase that time that you're at the academy. And when you come out of the academy, almost every agency I know has what's called a field training program. Ours is 3 months. It could be extended to 4 or 5 months, where the candidates or our recruits learn how to police in Riverside, because there's no question that there's different expectations in different communities. So the expectation here in Riverside might not be the same as the expectation in a much larger suburb. Take, for example, Rockford or Springfield, Illinois. So that you have to have the officers trained to your internal policies, your procedures, what's expected of them here, what the expectations of the community are, and in our case, what the expectations of our residents are and our elected officials are all part of the program. So they go through the field training program, and they can still be dismissed. So the law allows police departments to, if the candidate does not meet the standards within 1 year after graduation from the police academy, you are allowed to dismiss that police officer for noncompliance with your rules and regulations or your training standards. And that includes the internal training standards. And I'll have the deputy chief, maybe you could comment on what we do internally that's not state required or that we meet the state mandate.
Yeah, so moving forward, once they get beyond the field training process, it's a continual education process throughout their entire career. So even for myself, I've been here 32 years and the chief's been here 35 years. We continuously, I have to get in at least 20 hours of training a year on various topics. So does the chief, the lieutenant, but every officer on the department has continuous training, and we have mandates that we have to meet. The thing I'm proud of here in Riverside, not only do we meet them, every officer here has met those mandates, and we've gone beyond that. We've met the mandates, and we get more training than what is required by law. And so I think it's a real good thing. Education's a very positive thing that we do here, and a lot of people think that police, we just go out hands-on training and range training, shooting, things like that, and it's much more beyond that. Actually, the majority of our training is classroom training, learning about diversity, human rights, legal updates, procedural justice, all kinds of different things, de-escalation tactics, things like that. Much more beyond than going hands-on and range training, things like that. But I'm proud to say that we've met all our mandates and gone beyond that.
So to follow up on that, in addition to the de-escalation that you mentioned, another big concern is the bias training. Is that kind of continuing education also provided to our officers on an ongoing basis?
Yes. The last time we had bias training was, I believe, in November, and it's a continual process where it's incorporated bias training. Mental health training is another big topic that we constantly go over.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. This is another question I got from a resident to follow up on the mental health issue. She asked, police officers are often called upon to address situations related to substance use of disorders, mental illness, and other individual and societal issues. What non-policing needs are you seeing in our community?
I'll start with that one. So there's, without question, the biggest non-policing call for service that we are experiencing are two things, and I'd say in the last 2 years. Well-being checks, that's how the police are dispatched, or mental health issues. Sometimes these well-being checks are, in fact, mental health issues. So the officers have training, but quite frankly, we don't have enough training. There needs to be more state-mandated training, for sure, and more funding for that, without a doubt. And we need to, in my opinion, we need to have social workers working with us. Because while we partner with social workers, the social work organization we're partnering with right now doesn't do 24/7. They do office hours, basically, and we refer people to them. They don't have a social worker respond with us because they tell us they don't have the funding and they don't have the personnel because they haven't had the funding to do the personnel to do the 24-hour service. So I would like to see what would be called a health response team. So at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, which you can imagine is when we get a lot of these type of calls, that if an officer needs a mental health professional to be with them at the home or in our police station or out on the street, that somebody could respond with us or in a really quick period of time to assist us, and in most cases take over the situation. Because what is happening now with people that we go on these well-being checks and they need medical attention is we're calling the paramedics and we're transporting that individual that needs medical attention to a local hospital. And quite frankly, the local hospitals aren't admitting a lot of these individuals, and they're overwhelmed and they don't have the resources. So, you know, in my opinion, we need tremendous amount of funding for mental health issues and what we call well-being checks, because that's what we're seeing a spike in. Would you agree?
Yes.
You know, I mean, that is, there's no, and I think you could ask any chief, you could ask any police agency. I know of no chief that would turn down a social worker, a mental health worker, whatever classification, that they would welcome that. We need to make sure that Springfield funds that. That is, there is no, every police agency that I know of, all my counterparts would take that help in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and I guess I'm sorry, I was remiss. You know, as we're going along here, I'm kind of quizzing these gentlemen right now. But if we're talking about something that you're interested in and you want to follow up, just shout out. If I don't see you, raise your hand, and so that you can be part of this conversation. I'm hoping that these questions I've received in advance are hitting a lot of the areas we're interested in. But please participate as we go along. So let's get to, yes, please. Emily, could you go up to there so that folks at home can hear you?
You mentioned that you would welcome a social worker, and on the Riverside payroll, there is a mental health specialist to answer questions on mental health, and she is hired part-time. Has there been consideration on either hiring someone else or hiring her full-time to assist the Riverside Police Department?
You asking if we would take help from the township mental health?
Yes.
Absolutely. We've met her. My staff has met her. As far as, unless you have information that I don't have, they don't have the funding through the townships for full-time, responsive people coming out at the field. But the township would be an absolute logical resource for police to use because they have the ability, they have a separate funding source too. But they also need money from Springfield. They also need that. But I think that township would be a natural partner for. I'll speak for myself, but I think it would be. Riverside Township takes in more than Riverside. So you could ask any of the chiefs. I think they would love to work with the township, especially if they could respond more than business hours. But you're correct.
Thank you.
President Sells, just for clarification,
Please.
Could you make sure that everyone understands the distinction between the village and the township?
Yeah, that's a good point. The difference between the village and the township, and we've also been joined now by Trustee Collins. The village government is exactly that. It is contiguous with the village of Riverside, and so that is our jurisdiction. The township, the Riverside Township, incorporates Riverside, parts of North Riverside, Brookfield, and Lyons. The township structure is a remnant of a political division that happened back post-Civil War. Illinois, I think, might be unique in the number of townships we have. So we have completely different governing structures. We have completely different taxing structures. There is, under the statutory direction for the township, there is a mental health component. So they actually have a levy that funds mental health resources, and that is where this social worker is located, not as part of the village of Riverside. So anything on that point before I move on? So let's get to some of the touchy questions now, because what we've seen, unfortunately, that has created a lot of the in my view, justified protest has been use of excessive force in some places around the country. It's my understanding from talking with you, Chief Weitzel, that in your time here, Riverside, we have never had an excessive force complaint. Is that correct?
We've never had, I've been the chief since 2008. There's never been a use of force complaint filed against one of my officers. We do have very detailed policies, as probably most agencies do, but our policies are developed by our attorneys. They're also developed by our insurance company. They also have feedback from police executives. They're all public documents. There's our rules and regulations for officers, and then there's the police department's policies. So yes, I do have very good policies. We have supervisor review. We have forms they have to fill out. And I would distinguish from, I'm not saying we don't use force, so I don't want any of my residents or any of you here to think that the police, because sometimes we do have to use force at the arrest. Filed a complaint against a police officer? No. Have we had to use force? Yes. The officers have use of force reports. They have use of force diagrams. You've probably seen these use of force documents that have like a picture of a body and, where you had to use the force. They have those. So yes, we have policies, procedures. We have documents. It's reviewed. Every single time an officer uses force, the report goes through the lieutenant, to the deputy chief, and it comes up to me, and I sign off on it every time. Now, that use of force could be that the officer had to deploy their taser, which is rare. But we even make our officers fill out use of force reports if they display their taser. So, for example, if my officer has to pull his taser out and point it, but doesn't actually discharge the taser, we consider that a use of force because he's displaying a device that could be used as force. So they have to do the same exact paperwork they would even if they, deployed that device.
So one resident had a question about what is considered necessary force. Is necessary force synonymous with the use of force that you're talking about there?
Necessary force is the force necessary to effect the arrest, then it stops. So once you get the handcuffs on somebody or once they're in custody, force stops. Any force stops. So, and that's how our policy is defined. So if you're taking somebody into custody where they're arrested, once the handcuffs go on, they're in your custody. They're put in the police car and they're transported. So the necessary force is the force used to get somebody in custody, and then it stops. And it's pretty rare. I mean, you'd be surprised that most of the people we come across in our community they're compliant. We don't have a lot of those types of situations. It does happen. I would say the most frequent would be like DUI arrests, for example. People don't think they're intoxicated. Sometimes they don't want to go with the officer. That would be something we would see more of. But yes, I think the officers are well versed in it. They're trained, and we always have a supervisor working every shift. If we don't have a sergeant working, we have what's called an OIC, which is an officer in charge, which has been trained in the same. So there's never a time in this community where just 2 patrolmen are working. There's either a supervisor, meaning a sergeant, or an officer in charge.
So what would the process be if there was a complaint? If somebody did have a complaint with regard to use of force or any other, how are the police policed in Riverside?
Really good question. So it's covered, there's a gamut for that, right? It's covered by state statute. It's also covered by our internal policies and procedures. Our complaint forms, if that's the way you want it to go, are available in our lobby. They're available at our website. You could email the chief. You could call me. You can come in and ask for a supervisor. That's most likely what happens. So when somebody wants to file a complaint against the officer, even if it's something for his minor, if he was or she was rude to them, they almost always come into our facility, and they ask to either speak to a supervisor or get the complaint form. And it's usually the supervisor the day it happened, because if they feel that they were something unjust, they usually either come into the police department and ask for the sergeant that's working that day, or if it's a day shift and we're their command personnel, and we go out and talk to them and we address their concerns, and then they file, if they want a formal investigation done, then there's an actual process that's covered by state statute for that, and we follow that process. At the end of the day, it comes to me. So those investigations, to be impartial, are not done by me. The investigations are done by the lieutenant or the deputy chief, and then it comes to me for review, and then I make a decision on whether the complaint is what they call sustained, not sustained, or unfounded, and you are notified. Not only are you notified verbally, the Riverside Police Department sends you a letter on our letterhead notifying you of the outcome of that investigation.
Could I add something? Just
Sure.
Please.
to add what the chief said, and I don't think it was,
Bill, can you get a little closer to
I'm
your
sorry.
mic?
Every complaint that comes in gets investigated. It's not like some do, some don't. Everything that comes in gets looked at and investigated. So if it's not, nothing sidetracked. If somebody comes up to a sergeant and complains about an officer, that sergeant will start with it and then refer it to the lieutenant, but every complaint gets looked at.
And to complete the complaint tree in Riverside, if someone had a complaint about Chief Weitzel, they would go to Village Manager Francis, because the village manager oversees the police department. There was a time in Riverside's history where the police and fire chiefs were actually hired and fired by the village president. One of the things that I'm proud that we were able to change is that it's no longer the case. Our public safety departments are completely separated from the elected officials in the village. They are managed by our professional staff. So there's no coming to me to complain about our police department. That goes to village manager Francis. Kind of maybe a little bit larger picture question that we got here is, how is, and this is you're a perfect group to answer this given your experience, how's it different now? How is policing different now than when you started out as a young patrol officer on the beat?
I'll let everybody take a shot at that, but I'll say at the beginning. So for me, if you wanted to talk, that'd be 36 years ago. You're really dating me. But for me, the single biggest change that I've seen overall and late is technology is outpacing us for sure because of finances and funding and data and evidence-based. And there's a big difference. So evidence-based policing, that you might hear that, and data collection, because my village board or your elected officials, you residents here, it's okay for me to try to justify things to my board anecdotally, but that's kind of gone away. So in most cases, if I'm standing in front of my board trying to justify, especially an expense or some other new piece of equipment, they want some type of data to back that up. I can honestly say that wasn't always the way it is. They certainly want justification. They want data and maybe some research done on something that I'm asking for. That's been a huge change, I'd say, in the last 5 years, for sure, for me in the position as chief. But we're also getting college-educated police officers. When I started, a majority of the officers we were hiring were high school graduates or out of the military, one or two. Rarely did we have a college graduate, period, whether that be associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or master's degree. We had somebody apply. We have 62 people apply for police officer for our September test. We have 2 people on that list that have law degrees. So what's motivating them to apply, I don't know, but they're well educated. So, and if you guys want to comment, maybe what you've seen.
The biggest thing I've seen, obviously, is technology has come a long way, but a big thing that I've seen compared to when I first started to what I see now is a lot of what we did when I first started was one way. And over time, places like State's Attorney's Office and Cook County and different state laws have pushed much more on top of the police officer, where we have to do just a ton more work. Where like a domestic violence arrest in the past, when I started, was a simple fill out the complaint form, sign off on it, and get the person ready for bond court, and they're off. Now it's hours and hours of paperwork that go along with it, where once the state's attorney's office used to do that, or some other agency used to do it, now the police officers have to do it to prepare for it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's a lot more work than what it was in the very beginning. Frank?
That's very true. What I've noticed is an increase in person-on-person crimes more than like a theft or a burglary. There's more crimes with being involved with like a person, like the bad guy against the victim themselves. And the deputy chief is absolutely correct when he says that there's more expected of us at this time, right now, through the courts, through the community itself. The community wants us to, and expects us to help them and solve it and make it better. And sometimes we just don't have the time to do that, or we try and give them resources to do that, and it's just not there. But we do our best, the best we can.
You know, just to follow up though, because I have a feeling that one aspect of that question, I mean, I understand the technology in the form, but what about the actual interaction on the street? You know, with the actual interaction between our police force and our residents. Have you seen a change in that relationship during your time here?
No, I'll speak for myself. So I started as a patrolman 36 years ago, and I came from another police agency, and the support for police in this community has always been fantastic. And I'll say support for public safety. And I mean that from our residents to our elected officials. You know, there's not a week or two that goes by where a resident doesn't call me or email me and thank me for something an officer did, or we have residents that drop off food all the time. They've dropped off gift cards for Dunkin' Donuts or somewhere in town, not for us, but to go buy food for like this shift. And the officers, you know, we've had really good relations with our residents. They're very supportive of police, very supportive of public safety. And that includes our school districts. I mean, it's the residents, it's the school staff, it's the kids, the interaction we have with the kids and especially in the school-age kids. So I would say that there's always been an unwavering support for police, and it's only increased in my career.
You would agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, over time, I think we've had the community support since day one that I've been here, and I've continuously just seen that constantly. The 4th of July activities, I can't believe how many people come up to us and just thank us. And I think the support is overwhelming in this community. But I think we have the support of the communities because we have a great police department. And there is, like Chief Weitzel said, use of force complaints, there isn't any. It's because I think we try to hold ourselves to that higher standard to do things the right way.
Officers that came up. She got a little belligerent because she was doing some underage drinking, but they were very respectful, help. I mean, I can't say nothing but great things. They're amazing, and they handled the situation from a belligerent teenager, me wanting to kill her, very professionally, seriously. And even after that whole incident, I had, it just so happens my daughter played with this individual's daughter on a softball team, and he came up to me and we kind of talked about it afterwards. So, he kind of asked about my daughter. So it didn't just end at that moment. He was still concerned with the situation. I said, no, she's doing better. So it didn't end at that immediate contact. He still continued to show concern after the fact. So I got to say, you guys have been great. And like I said, I've been here for 20 years. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know,
So, hold it. Just so I don't have to keep saying this, so if you want to comment, you need to go up to the podium so that people at home can hear you, because otherwise, they're going to know you were talking, but they're not going to know what you said. So just make sure. No, that's all right. We heard.
you know, we're very invested in the community. I'll just piggyback on that. So, you know, I have officers that live in Riverside. I have 2 police officers that live here. We have Spanish-speaking officers, African-American officers, female officers. I have an officer that does sign language. We have officers that are deeply invested. They came here, they chose to test with us, and they've chose to make Riverside their career.
You know, to follow up on that, because how many did you say we had on the list for that were?
So we did the written exam about 2 months ago. We had to do it virtually because of COVID-19. But we'll be doing the interviews in September by state statute. There's 62 applicants that have made it to that point.
So and I know that you don't do this, the fire and police commissioners do this, but when they're going through and vetting these people, do they take diversity into account? I mean, is there a concerted effort to make sure that we have more diversity on our force?
Well, they follow the state statute, and the state statute only allows for the written, the oral exam, the preference points if anybody has them. They can go up to 5 preference points, and there's a host of things you can get those for, not just military, college education, if you're a police explorer, there's a whole list. And then that's the initial list. But we, as an agency, we recruit. So we participate in what's called so before the police and fire commissioners even get into the process, we have to advertise for the position. So we advertise it with the Blue Line, our local papers. And the Blue Line's really important because that goes to every single college and university in our area. So we attend the job fairs. We have an officer go as a table, and he'll go to if there's a job fair in the city of Chicago, if the college notifies us they're having a job fair and it's in law enforcement, we'll send an officer to put out our recruiting brochures and tell the individuals when the tests are. So that's where we get a lot of instead of just coming to Riverside, we participate in the wider ranging of recruiting into diversity.
Have a question from somebody in the audience. It says, Chief Weitzel, if you agree that your officers need help on mental health calls, then are you just going to wait for state funding to get a health response team started in Riverside?
No, I'm not. In fact, when I end tonight, I'll tell you what my priorities are. No, but no. So I serve on the Illinois Chiefs Legislative Committee, and I am not waiting. Now, can I force that to happen? Probably not, but I think it's going to happen, whoever asked me that question, because I haven't spoke to one of my counterparts, police chiefs, that doesn't want the same thing. So I think we're going to have a unified presence in Springfield for more mental health training and funding. And I think we'll be receptive because of, what's going on in America today. We're not blind. We see that. Plus, you'll have a group of police chiefs coming down to Springfield to lobby our legislators, and we're not asking for equipment. We're not there asking for squad cars. We're not there asking for more bulletproof vests. We're not there. So we're going to come down there as a group, ask for something that's pretty non-police traditional. I think we're going to have a very open reception from our state legislators in Springfield when the session starts again. So I will be there. I will be one of those police chiefs that will be in Springfield pushing for that legislation. And with legislation comes funding. So that's why I'll be there. Let's hope they don't do that and do it what has happened and not fund legislation. So that's a key component. If they pass like mandated legislation, they have to fund it for us.
So kind of bringing things back to Riverside, there's a question here. What is Riverside's greatest public safety threat, and what is the Riverside Police Department doing to address it?
I would agree with what my operations lieutenant said earlier, that we're seeing more and more person-on-person crime. Historically, Riverside has been a community that has property crime, thefts, burglaries, whether that be garage burglary, your home is burglarized. Lately, we've been seeing an uptick in more person-on-person crime, meaning where they're burglarizing your home while you're there. Still rare, but is happening, or a home invasion or a carjacking. But one of the things that we're doing is we're putting specific patrols out. At times, we put unmarked cars out, specific details. But what we're doing more is partnering with our neighbors, because it isn't just happening in Riverside. It's happening in our neighbor towns. And I can tell you that every single time we make an arrest of like a burglary suspect, a carjacking suspect, and we ask them, why did you pick Riverside Road in Olmsted? And they're like, Riverside Road in Olmsted? They don't even know where they're at. They came here off Harlem, Ogden. Most of these ones that we're arresting, they wouldn't know the difference between North Riverside and Brookfield. They don't know the boundary. They don't know that the east side of Harlem is Berwyn and the west side. So it's a phenomenon of the criminals are mobile now. They're in the cars. Just this past week, we made an arrest on a burglary suspect that was riding his bike from Chicago every night. All the way from Chicago with a baby seat on the back. And he did that because he wanted to come to Riverside because he thought he would get more proceeds here at a higher end community. And those are their words, not ours. So, I mean, in law enforcement, we just have to make sure we're sharing information with our partners, because what's going on in Riverside is going on in our neighboring communities. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
This is a long one for you. Regarding the new anonymous hotline, what is the definition of suspicious? And how are residents supposed to deem something to be suspicious or not? How will the police department determine what is investigated? There is a lack of diversity in Riverside that cannot be ignored. The likelihood of the suspicious person, in quotes, being a person of color is high. Does the police department understand that some reports may occur due to racism and microaggression?
Absolutely. No question. So we get reports of suspicious persons. You know, it goes into our 911 dispatch center, right? That's relatively new for us. We weren't always in this combined center. And traditionally, police officers or police agencies, you've heard it, if they have told residents, if you think it's suspicious in your neighborhood, call 911. Whether that's a suspicious car, a suspicious circumstance, a suspicious noise, a suspicious person. Many times residents call, don't want to give any other information except for somebody walking down the street, 2 o'clock in the morning has a backpack on. That's suspicious. And they hang up, they call 911. Currently, we're obligated by law to answer all 911 calls, okay? We're obligated to. There's this push to do a little bit more vetting at dispatch centers. I've heard that in my Chiefs Association meetings that I've gone to put some type of protocol. That's something we're going to have to think about, I mean, more than just Riverside, more globally going forward, that maybe you could articulate what's going on. So why is the person being suspicious? What are they doing? Are they walking in backyards? Are they, why is it a suspicious noise? Just this past week, we got a call of shots fired on Herrick Road. It was a car backfiring. But the resident at 2 o'clock in the morning called 911 and said, it's absolutely somebody firing a weapon. And the officers went there, and there was somebody there that had this fancy sports car, and he had modified the exhaust system, and it was what it is. But that's, you know, they didn't even report it as shots fired initially. They just reported suspicious noise. So yeah, there is a kind of like a movement to see if we can better vet those at the 911 centers, because what's happening is, you know, the police officers are in their car, right, and they're getting the radio call, and they're getting the radio call. They don't know what happened, and the dispatcher's relaying the information, saying, we got a report of a suspicious person walking in the backyard carrying a backpack. He's wearing a baseball hat, blue jeans. Sometimes the officers will what's called key up on their microphones and ask for more information. Many times the dispatcher says there's no more information available. Over half the phone calls we received in a 911 center are anonymous. We can track those. People don't want to leave their names. They just want to report the incident. So I think my officers are doing a good job of checking the area and asking them to, could you tell us what the person's doing that is suspicious? Because that even gives the officer a better chance to what he's investigating, right? Somebody walking down the street carrying a backpack or somebody's walking through backyards, that's a huge difference, huge difference. So the officer would know to be looking in backyards and he would know that there's more legitimacy to this. But whoever asked that question, you're correct. There is a tendency for just us to respond to what the dispatchers are being told by the 911 callers to what's happening. And I do think there's room for improvement in that. And I actually think you're going to see room for improvement in that. Because right now we vet, for example, if you call 911 and you're having a heart attack, they're going to go through a protocol. You're going to hear the dispatcher ask you, are you breathing? Because it's usually a second party calling. Is the person breathing? Are you doing CPR? Is he blue? Are you doing chest compressions? They're going to go through a protocol and they're going to give all that information to the paramedics before they arrive. I can see the day when there's a protocol for reporting, a more detailed protocol for reporting suspicious activity, noise, and people. I believe there's a legitimate concern there. Yes.
So do officers, if they get a call of a suspicious person, do they
I'm sorry, you might have to.
Officers, if they get a call of a suspicious person, will they make contact with every person? Or maybe they can just, if they notice it's just someone walking down the street at 2 a.m., maybe they'll consider that it's not suspicious?
So they will make contact if they fit the description, but they don't, they don't force the contact. For example, you walk down the street and you're fitting the description of the person that the dispatch gave us, blue jeans and a blue shirt and a baseball cap. And he's not doing anything but walking down the street, right? The officer's going to pull up a squad car, get out and say, could I speak to you? Most people say, sure, they do. The ones that say, no, I'm not doing anything wrong, I keep walking, they keep walking. Because if the officer saw them do nothing wrong, he can only go on what he sees and what's reported on the radio. So no, there's many occasions where the officers put in their blotter report, they have to write a little report that says, officers observe subject matching description. When asked him to stop and engage, in a conversation, he said or she said, I was doing nothing wrong, and they kept walking. And the officer puts in his report, I observed no suspicious activity while I was there. The individual was doing nothing illegal. He cleared the scene. So yes, that it actually does happen already. So we don't force the contact with everybody.
Thank you.
That's a really good question.
So to kind of follow up that a little bit, and I'd be interested to hear what all three of you think about this. So, we call upon the police department and your officers to solve crime and to respond to and to keep us safe. But you're on the front lines and you've been doing this a long time. Do you have any thoughts about the bigger question of what we as a society can do to address the underlying causes of crime? You've been doing this a long time. Do you have any thoughts about what we as a society have a responsibility to do?
Well, I do, and I'll let them answer too. So we need to partner with our community, and especially in the bigger urban areas. I'll give you my perspective from being on the police chief's steering committee, and I'm also a co-chairperson for an organization called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, Illinois. And you would absolutely, and you tell me if you disagree, you would absolutely see crime go down in every major metropolitan area in the United States of America if we could produce more jobs, address the poverty issue, address proper education, address systemic type of biases that are out there. Believe me, how many people have we taken into custody that said that they had committed a burglary? Like they broke in, they committed a burglary, but they were unemployed, or they lost their job, or they give us statements like that. That's in the reports. we're not unsympathetic to that. They tell us that. And when you look at their background, you realize these aren't people with a rap sheet a mile long. So I think that once we as a society can better address poverty, education levels, and work with the community, because that's where we're seeing the crime being an uptick and happening. But those are long issues that are really happening in really big urban areas. But I would certainly say addressing poverty, addressing education would drastically make our job easier and reduce crime. I don't know if
Bill, Frank, you?
I'd love to add substance abuse, drug addiction. It's overwhelming right now on what's going on, even within our own community here, where substance abuse is overpowering families. And once people go down this road, they have to continue with the substance abuse, and sadly they commit crimes to try to get money to help their addiction. And your centers like Rosecrans and Gateway, it takes sometimes 5-6 times for people to go through these systems to get better. And sometimes they never get better. But educating the public, educating families on how bad substance abuse is, and so they could recognize it and get a grip on it, and funding for this, because unless you have good insurance, it's very hard to get into these centers. So,
And just to add what Chief Weitzel said, what he claims and what he says about the poverty and those issues that are going on, that filters down to all of the officers, not just the command staff. It doesn't stop here. It goes all the way down to all the officers. So as a family, I call it, that's what we believe in. That's what we try to help these people. There isn't a time that an officer, somebody needs to get on the L and go home on the west side or the south side or wherever they may live, and the officer will give them a couple bucks to get on the L and go home. That's not unusual. It really isn't. So what the chief is saying about the poverty issues and the unemployment issues, that filters all the way down to all the officers. It really does.
Like a game show host, I'm waiting for the next question here. 9 minutes remaining. Thank you. You mentioned that crime would go down if poverty and education was addressed. What is Riverside Police Department and the Village of Riverside doing to address this?
Well, I
maybe,
think
actually, let me take a stab at that one,
Yeah, go ahead.
because I mean, unfortunately for a small village like ours and the resources that we have, I mean, really, with regard to poverty, with regard to hunger issues, that has really been our faith community that has been addressing this through things like the food pantry and things like that. I think a lot of the things that Chief mentioned are things that are simply above us. They're too massive, they're too expensive. I mean, if you have ideas about what we can do at a local level in a village, like of 9,000 people, to address poverty concerns or education concerns or job infrastructure, which is another huge problem, let us know. I mean, unfortunately, I have to say, at our level, it's hard for me to think about much of what we can do at the local level, but we certainly would do anything that we can. So we are getting close to the end here. I have like one more kind of big picture, question to ask our panel, but I want to stop to make sure that that everybody here has had a chance to have their questions answered, and if you wanted to make some kind of comment before we move toward wrapping it up. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to mention? Okay. So the last question that we have here, actually, you know what? There's a couple real technical things. Is there a place on the police department website where one can view the annual and quarterly reports? The answer to that is yes.
Yes.
We actually have the
it's on the police portion of the website. So it's not on the front, but it is on the police portion.
And there are copies of the 2019 annual report right back here on this table if anybody's interested. Then we have a question about the auxiliary force. Are the officers of the auxiliary force armed?
They are. We only have currently only have 2 auxiliary officers. And the village ordinance is they must be residents or property owners to work for our auxiliary force, and their job is to assist us basically in public events, 3rd of July, 4th of July parades. They do not they do not operate squad cars. They do not answer police calls. They don't even ride with the officers. They're just there to assist us in the larger events.
And this is a follow-up question from this, given what their range of duties are, why are they armed?
That's a very good question, and it goes back to the ordinance where many, many years ago the village made what's called conservator of the peace. That means that auxiliaries can be armed. If that's something that our elected officials or we choose to do in the future to not do that, we would have to change an ordinance to do that. But the charter started, in the 1940s. When they had the auxiliary force. It really came all the way back then. And then they used to ride with the police officers. They used to be in a police car. That is no longer the case. At one time, we had 15, 20 auxiliary police officers. We're down to 2. And the reason that is because, quite frankly, people don't want to donate their time anymore. They don't get paid. They have to do the training. They have to meet the mandates. And that's a lot to do when you have a full-time job and then you have to meet the state mandates for the training. So our auxiliary force has shrunk, unfortunately, down to currently 2 members.
So my last big question here is, what does the future of policing look like from your perspective as frontline command staff?
It's already changing, certainly changing over the last 3 months, but you're going to see changes in state statutes. You're going to see changes in laws. You're going to see changes in mandates. And I think you're going to see a new model of policing. So I always felt as a police chief when Chicago came up with the term of community policing, or CAPS, which is their community policing, that small towns like Riverside, we were always doing community policing. We just didn't have a fancy name for it because we have such a small agency that the officers were out dealing with our residents and our children and our youth in the schools all the time. So I really felt that we were always doing that, but that was a shift. They weren't doing community policing before. There was this big shift in law enforcement 30 years ago to do the buzzword community policing. There's a shift happening now. There's nobody can deny that. It's happening. Where that ends up, I think there's going to be a more just police force, a more compassionate police force, and a better trained police force. At least that's my opinion.
Anything to add to that, gentlemen?
I couldn't agree more. Okay. The future is always clouded, especially in law enforcement. It's ever changing. From the time I started, from the 60s onward, it's always been changing. And I was taught by the chief before Chief Weitzel here was, we have to get to the next level. And at first, I kept hearing this, and I was thinking, when are we ever going to get to the next level? But you know what? Because it's ever changing, there always is that next level. Always is that next level. So the future is always clouded in policing because it's always going to be changing as we keep moving forward.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our talk. I think Chief Weitzel had a couple of remarks he wanted to make here at closing. And let me say before he does that, thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank you to the residents who sent in questions. This is just the first of these. This is something that I feel very strongly that we need to continue to have this constant dialogue with our police and public safety officials, because we work for you. And we need to know what you expect of us and how we can best meet your needs while keeping you safe. So, Chief Weitzel.
Thank you. I want to thank the village president and board of trustees and our village manager, Jessica Francis, who's in the back of the room there, for holding this event, and for my command staff to show up. So instead of reading this because we're running out of time, I just want the residents to know you have a compassionate, just police department. Any backbone of any police department is its patrol and investigations. They can replace me tomorrow. They can replace the command staff, but the patrol officers are the ones on the street at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning answering the calls. Any agency, the backbone is their patrol men and women. So that being said, as your chief, I want you to know what I'm going to be advocating for this upcoming legislative year down in Springfield, and just as the chief of the Village of Riverside. Here's what I think some of the initiatives I'm doing myself or signing on to. I am going to fully support the development and standardization of a nationwide policy for use of force, because right now every state is different. I could leave here and be hired as the police chief in Indiana. It's not anywhere like Illinois. We do need a national standard. I am going to fully support strengthening accountability through national decertification of police officers. We need that. If there's bad cops, they need to go. But what we need to make sure of is that they don't go from here to California. So right now we could decertify somebody in Illinois, and if they apply in Utah or Wyoming, you may not know that. So we need a national database for that, which I am going to advocate for. I'm going to support the National Police Misconduct Decertification Database. That is an international chiefs initiative I'm going to support. I'm going to support the mandating every single law enforcement agency in the United States report to the FBI use of force database. One database. Illinois has their own database. Wisconsin has their own. Indiana might not have any. Missouri might not have any. They need a national database that requires it. And the way you get that done is when the DOJ or the federal government says if you don't comply, you don't get federal grant money. Every single police agency will comply when they withhold grant money from you. There's no police agency that does not take grant money. I'm going to fully support the use of force decertification, like I said. I'm going to actively work on the 10 shared principles through the Illinois Chiefs Association. I will be in front of this village board in the future with that initiative. And I'm also going to continue to work for Fight Crime, Invest in Kids Illinois. I'm going to work in early childhood education, in Redeploy Illinois. These are data-driven programs that have proven track records. I've been a 9-year member of that organization, and I was honored to recently be co-chair of Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. So that is an organization that has all data-driven, evidence-driven, and only concentrates on young children, so we don't ever see them. But something as easy as home health care, early childhood development, early childhood education, early childhood medical, those are all items that I have personally testified for in Springfield for the Fight Crime Invest in Illinois, and I'm still going to continue to do that. So I just want our residents to know you have a well-trained staff. You know, between us here, there's 90 years. I think I'm dating us, but each of us here has over 30 years on the job. We've seen a lot for a small town, and I would like our residents to know that we're here for you. I'm always available, and I'd like to, while our elected officials are here, I think our residents should know we get tremendous support from our elected officials. Watch our board meeting. Watch how we have to justify. The village president said something earlier that I kind of glossed over, but there is accountability. So this village board and my village manager, there isn't a single week that goes by that I don't have some contact with my village manager. Not 1 week. That's oversight. And sometimes she calls to correct me. And sometimes she calls to praise me. But that's the job. And this village board has always been supportive of law enforcement, but they've also held us accountable. And they've also asked for results. And they've also asked for, justifications. I don't see that in every single municipality. So I'm honored to work. I love Riverside. I've been here 36 years. I'm honored to work here. I'm honored to work in a village manager form of government where I answer to the village manager and she answers to the elected officials and the elected officials answer to you. In my opinion, that's the way it should work. So I thank you for holding this event.
Thank you. So I want to thank, I didn't say that I was remiss earlier, Firefighter Munguia was back there. She's been keeping the podium clean and sanitized between speakers, so thank you, Firefighter. I appreciate you doing that. And with that, since this is technically a called meeting, I would ask for a motion and a second to adjourn. A motion by Mr. Hannon, second by Ms. Collins. Trustees is present. All in favor? Opposed? The meeting is adjourned, and thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.